Welcome, everyone. I'm Katie Courtauld, Senior Curator of Drawings at the Courtauld Gallery, and delighted tonight to have Alexa McCarthy here to talk about blue paper function in the creation of form. And I'm going to read something about Alexa, introducing her before she will deliver her paper. Alexa studied at the Courtauld, where she graduated in 2010 with a master's thesis on Titian's Cupids, a study of Eros and Anteros in the works of the Venetian master, under the supervision of Professor Paul Hills. Subsequently, she completed her PhD at the University of St. Andrews with a dissertation on carta azzurra, blau papier, drawing on blue paper in Italy and the Netherlands circa 1450 to 1660. During her PhD research and since completing her degree, Alexa has contributed to several conferences and workshops, including at the Renaissance Society of America, the Warburg Institute, the Cleveland Museum of Art, and at the College Art Association in New York. In 2021, she has organized the conference Venice in Blue, which due to COVID was held online, as many conferences and talks we attended in those years, the result of which is the book that is over there on the table and that you can pre-order through a QR code if you want. Alexa has published several articles on blue paper drawings, including in Venetian Disegno New Frontiers, the conference proceedings, which was presented here, in fact, this past spring. Currently, she is Executive Director of the Greater Des Moines Public Art Foundation, a non-profit organization that oversees public art installation for the city of Des Moines in Iowa. In this position, she is currently overseeing an art project at the International Airport, a $4 million art project which oversees 5 expansive site-specific installations. All of the pieces will be site-specific, sculptural installations that will engage with the architecture. Previously, she worked as curatorial and collections associate for the Leiden Collection in New York and as collection management assistant in the Department of Prints and Drawings at the Met in New York City. Alexa continues to work on the subject of blue paper, and the current research investigates the way artists depict the tonality of skin on blue paper. So join me in welcoming Alexa here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ketty, for the very kind introduction. And I tend to speak quite softly, so if you can't hear me, please let me know. I'll do the best to speak in the microphone. So again, thank you so much, Ketty, and to Rachel Hafnew for inviting me here to the Courtauld to speak on the occasion of the exhibition Drawn to Blue. I'm quite honored to be back here at the Courtauld as I studied with Professor Paul Hills, and I'm very grateful that he's here in the audience tonight, in 2010 for his MA Titian, Venice, and Europe. This course had a profound impact on my art historical scholarship, which focuses on drawings produced in Italy during the 16th century and in the Netherlands during the 17th century, with blue paper as a point of intersection between these two cultures. The material proved instrumental in the composition and development of figural drawings in the Veneto and Amsterdam, separated by the span of about a century. Although blue paper exists as a support in public and private collections throughout the world, it has until recently received relatively little attention in art historical scholarship. My doctoral research at the University of St. Andrews, completed in 2022, resulted in the first large-scale study dedicated to blue paper and its use for draftsmanship, particularly figure studies, examining questions of production, commerce, and artistic practice. Our book, Venice in Blue, which I'll share on this side, published by Leo S. Olschi Editore, which focuses on the use of blue paper and for drawing and printing in the Veneto in the first half of the 16th century, is now available. The publication evolved, as Ketty mentioned, from the 2021 conference proceedings, and the volume contains knowledge gained through collaboration between art historians, book historians, and paper conservators. Essays explore the pre-industrial papermaking process and the materiality of blue paper, as well as the relationship between the use of blue paper for drawings in the Tintoretto workshop and coeval texts on artistic practice. the production and use of blue paper in the market, the intersections of drawings and etchings on blue paper, the editions of Serlio's third and fourth books on architecture printed on blue paper, and new perspectives on the practice of printing books on this particular support. Today, however, I will discuss blue paper as a point of intersection between Venice and Amsterdam, interweaving drawings from the present exhibition. Through its inherent tonality, blue paper is a particularly efficient and effective means through which to render figures and figural compositions which can serve to inform the coloristic details of paintings. Blue paper serves as the middle tone, an ideal surface through which to capture the complexities of the human body in space through the modulation of light and dark drawing implements like charcoal, ink, and wash. So if we return back to these two figure studies, the comparatively large number of drawings on this handmade blue paper that survive by artists working in 16th century Venice and 17th century Amsterdam demonstrate that the material was internationally recognized as an integral part of artistic practice. The use of handmade blue paper as a support for drawings of figures and figural compositions transcends temporal and spatial boundaries, connecting artists working in both southern and northern Europe beginning in the mid-15th century. And my research centers on artists' use of blue paper made with blue fibers, or that which is colored blue during its production, rather than papers that are prepared with a colored wash. If we could look again more closely in the detail of Flink's figure here, handmade blue paper contained clumps of unprocessed fibers like rope and cord, shives or pieces of wood, and sailcloth, fishnets, and wool, all largely available in Zaandijk, which is just north of Amsterdam. By 1660, mills in the area such as Oudeblauw and De Schoolmeister specialized in blue paper. Blue paper is primarily colored with woad, indigo, or logwood, and during the paper making process, it is important to note that as we see these drawings, we will notice they may now appear greenish, brownish, grayish, having become discolored or faded over time. Technical analysis is often required to begin to understand the original qualities of the paper. Colored papers can be created through a variety of means, each producing a different result. These types of fabricated colored paper include self-colored paper, and that is in which the raw materials such as blue rags produce the color of the sheet, colored by inclusion or the addition of colored fibers into the pulp base, paper that has been dyed in a beater as the pulp is being beaten, and paper that has been dyed in the vat. In addition to being prepared by the artist, it is also possible that a neutral colored sheet was dyed after its manufacture with white or neutral sheets soaked in color by the paper maker, colorman, or merchants. The difference between these types of blue paper can be difficult to discern with the naked eye and without a microscope, but often individual fibers in the sheet can aid the viewer. Spanning 5 centuries, the Courtauld exhibition brings together drawings on both prepared blue paper or handmade, inherently blue paper, as seen here in the drawing attributed to Joachim Pfeiffer on prepared blue paper at left, and the Francesco Salviati drawing on handmade blue paper at right. The vivid blue of Pfeiffer's sheet, together with the neutral color of the support revealed through creases and nuanced brush strokes in varying tones of blue, are indicative of prepared blue paper. By contrast, Salviati's variegated sheet shows individual blue rag fibers as well as neutral fibers, revealing that the paper was blue before the sheet itself was formed. Handmade blue paper is particularly interesting in that it was produced throughout Europe as a material for wrapping, and then it was widely adopted later for artistic purposes. So, requiring no preparation at all on the part of the artist, the material proved a quick and efficient means through which to render forms in space, emphasizing on the inherent mid-tone of the blue support. The focus of the human figure explores the most critical component of an artist's education and practice, as subject was considered to be the most challenging aspect. Antique statues, plaster casts, and wooden, clay, or wax models served as important guides for this practice, as we can see here in Tintoretto's copies, or his workshop's copies of drawings after Michelangelo's Philistines, a cast that he evidently held in his workshop. We know from Carlo Ridolfi and Raffaello Borghini that Tintoretto collected and studied casts of important sculptures, and numerous studies after casts by the artists and members of his workshop testify to this method. John Marchiari has argued that members of the workshop not only drew studies of sculptural casts, but also copied Tintoretto's blue paper drawings of them. Indeed, the comparatively large surviving corpus of drawings by Tintoretto in his workshop, due to the continuation of the workshop for almost 50 years after the master's death, is a testament to the workshop's enduring proclivity for blue paper. In a statement referring to the trajectory of artistic training, Dutch painter and writer Arnold Houbraken stated that artists must have preparation for drawing the live figure, noting that, quote, "One cannot go on ice without skates here," which I just love. Paintings such as those seen here reveal the efficacy of tonal depictions on the readily available inherently blue support. So you can see on the table in the allegory of arts at right, and then also in the hands of the young draftsman in the Dutch painting left, this kind of ubiquitous reference to drawing three-dimensional models with blue paper. Of course, the mid-tone of the support provided a catalyst for the illusion of three-dimensionality. In the late 16th century, Dutch artist Hendrik Holtzius employed blue paper for his so-called Roman drawings in the collection at the Tylers Museum in Haarlem, many of which were made in preparation for a series of engravings. Holtzius drew some of these statues twice, once from direct observation in black and white chalk on blue paper, and then he drew them a second time, refining his studies in red chalk on a neutral colored sheet. This series of drawings emblematizes the function of blue paper in Holtzius's artistic practice. As Emil Reznicek and Ilya Veldman further developed, in the study of blue paper for Holtzius was likely drawn first as a model for the red chalk version. So he drew the blue paper version first and then based his red chalk version upon it. The red chalk version was then what he was using for the engraving. The two studies for the Farnese Hercules seen from behind demonstrate how the function of the drawing on blue paper, with pronounced outlines, seemingly rapid shading, and attention to the modeling of form, was primarily to render the contrast of light and shade in providing a sense of three-dimensionality through the multiplicity of tones. Holtzius carefully executed the red chalk version with soft hatching and more subtle transitions between passages of dark and light, and this was the version that then served as the guide for the black and white engraving. The majority of Holtzius's Roman drawings on blue paper, including the Farnese Hercules, exhibit hard outlines on the reverse, which were intended for transfer to the red chalk version, reinforcing Veldman's argument referring to the preparatory nature of the blue paper drawing. For some of these blue paper drawings, there is no known engraving or extant red chalk version. However, the presence of these incised lines is certainly indicative of their preparatory function. Once the red chalk version was complete, the sheet was indented for transfer like the blue paper version, and the indented contours were filled with carbon black, indicating that Holtzius traced the outlines with a stylus while the paper was placed onto a blackened sheet. These blackened outlines were mirrored images of the original and were thus incised onto the copper plate so that the print would actually be in the same direction as the drawing rather than in reverse. Holtzius used blue paper to explore the contrasts of sculpture, the tonal contrasts of sculpture, which would be further refined for and through the medium of engraving. The function of the blue paper version was schematic yet pronounced outlines, rapid hatching, and strong areas of white heightening was primarily to render the contrast of light and shade in providing that sense of three-dimensionality through the multiplicity of tones. During the early modern period, there were three main functions for which paper was produced: wrapping, writing, and by proxy drawing, as there was no official drawing paper, and printing. In order to make paper, discarded rags were sorted by color, strength, fineness of weave, according to fiber type and condition, whether new, used, or heavily worn. As Caroline Fowler has expressed, the paper that transformed the landscape of European art was rag paper, which was a product of waste and filth. Rag paper differs from parchment and vellum in that the sheets are comprised of cellulose fibers from fabric rather than the protein fibers from processed animal skins. The three main types of fabric were linen, hemp, and cotton, with occasional woolen fibers added to rag pulp for wrapping and blotting paper, which were the less refined papers. Paper mill employees were responsible for sorting the rags, and most of these employees were women and children. They were tasked with judiciously classifying the textile materials acquired by the mill for the purpose of paper making. The textiles were sorted by fineness according to grades ranging from superfine to coarse. A 14th century register from the Fabriano City Archives lists 4 categories of rags in descending order according to quality and associated price. And in the list, the finest quality clean white rags, or cenci boni, were the most expensive, where the cenci neri, or dark-colored rags for discarded from other categories, were separated for making the least expensive paper, which was for wrapping. Once the rags were sorted and checked to ensure their uniform quality, the fibers were then retted or fermented with the weave broken down through the process of soaking in a boiling water or alkaline solution. The duration of the retting process depended on the type of rag, the time of year, the associated temperature, and the proportions of the chemicals used in relation to the amount of processing rags. But why blue rather than other colors is a fundamental question. But in addition to the white, gray, and brown papers, which were also produced during the early modern period, the blue fabric colorants of woad and indigo were strong enough to withstand the paper-making process. Blue was also one of the darkest colors available to cover stains so that clothing, which was of course expensive, could continue to be worn. Black fabrics required a succession of dye baths to achieve, making them more costly to produce, particularly until the mid-16th century. This is a contributing factor in the prevalence of blue rags for paper production. Therefore, beyond aesthetic motivations, blue paper was therefore practical to make and to use. And in the Netherlands during the 17th century, Dutch sailor cloth, which was already blue, was a source of these blue rags. After the retting process was complete, the rags were sometimes washed and cut and then placed in vats with water and beaten with a stamper beater to produce pulp. Once the pulp was of an even consistency, the process of sheet forming began. An individual known as the vatman would dip the mold and decal, or wooden frame that surrounded the mold, into the vat of pulp and then lift it up horizontally, as we can see in both of these images here, keeping it as even as possible so that the fibers would be distributed equally along the mold. The water drained through the wires of the mold, leaving an even sheet of pulp, and the vatman removed the decal from the mold and carefully gave it to his colleague, the coucher, meaning to lay, who turned it over, pressing the sheet of paper from one side onto the other in a rolling motion. Simultaneously, the vatman, using a second mold with one decal, formed the next sheet. These 2 molds required in this process would each have watermarks and occasionally countermarks, which were meant to appear identical. These nearly identical marks are known as twin marks. And in some paper mills, the vatman and coucher were making sheets of paper for an individual referred to as the layer would separate the sheets from the felt. Stacks of paper were then pressed to expel water in wooden presses with iron screws. The pressed paper was hung to dry in spurs or groupings of 3 to 8 sheets. Once the paper was dry, it was sized or coated, often with gelatin sizing to increase the paper's resistance to the penetration of liquids, including ink. The sizing process depended on the intended use of the paper, whether it be wrapping, writing, or printing. Once sized, the paper was dried again before finishing or glazing with a smooth stone or glazing hammer for uniformity of surface. And that's what we see here, both in the drying loft and then our little glazing studio. And so in transmitted light, evidence of the hand paper making process is visible in these two sheets, both which are 16th century Italian examples. And we see here lentils or clumps of fabric, couching or ripples at the edges of the sheet. And the sheet at left displays an Italian watermark. And watermarks on sheets of blue paper can be particularly tricky, especially in the Netherlands. And this is where cheaper types of blue and gray paper seem to have been made on old molds that were no longer usable for the manufacture of pristine white paper and were sold at public auction. Therefore, blue paper may have the watermarks and countermarks of paper mills that never produced it. By the time Dutch cartographer Johan Blauw created the map of Fabriano seen here, the northern Netherlands had already become an important site of papermaking. However, the inset interior of a paper mill at lower right indicates the Dutch were already aware of Fabriano's renown in the craft. Although papermaking in the Italian town of Fabriano was not officially organized into its own guild until 1326, it is evident that Venice acquired paper from Fabriano as early as 1223. Fabriano in the province of Ancona in the Marche region had a ready supply of clean water and established industries involved in papermaking, including the processing of dyestuffs such as wool and metalworking. Fabriano is located in the valley of the Giano, where the hills lead to the Apennine Mountains. The fertile soil and abundant water sources attracted industry. Fabriano's large population and its strong ties with surrounding cities, including Florence, Perugia, and Pisa, added to the city's prosperity. The Italian peninsula's networks of roads linked Fabriano with its maritime neighbors and subsequently with trade outposts in the Middle East and North Africa. Soon after the establishment of papermaking in Fabriano in the 13th century, important production centers developed near Venice, Genoa, Piemonte, and Lake Garda. Italian paper, known in the Netherlands as Lombard paper, because of the merchants from Lombardy that dealt in the material, was exported through Germany, northern France, and Antwerp. During the 14th century, Italy continued to dominate in paper manufacture and export, and indeed a large amount of the paper that was used in 15th century England, particularly the white paper, came from Italy via merchant ships originating in Genoa or Venice. By the mid-14th century, paper mills in France and Switzerland began to challenge Italy's monopoly on paper, and France became a subsequent leading power in the paper trade. Both French and Italian paper was used in the Netherlands in the 15th century, and Italian paper continued to be imported into the Netherlands on a small scale until the 17th century. Although blue paper was used in the Netherlands since the beginning of the 14th century, the first Dutch paper mill was founded there in 1586 in Dordrecht, evidenced by a government decree authorizing Hans van Alst and Jan Leupard to establish a paper mill there. The beginning of the Dutch paper trade is directly tied to the 1585 fall of Antwerp and the ensuing cessation of trade between them. Here I show an early Dutch paper mill, the De Middelmolen, or the Middle Mill, in Leunen, which was established in 1622. Now a museum which still makes paper using pre-industrial methods, this was an important site of 17th century blue paper production in the Netherlands. The earliest mention of blue paper dates from a Bolognese statute from 1389, which serves to codify standards for price, quality, size, and weight. The sizes and names of 4 types of paper, Imperiale, Reale, Mezzana, and Rezzuta, were codified to such an extent that they were carved full scale on a stone slab, seen in this rather poor reproduction, placed in the headquarters of the Bolognese Società del Speziale, a guild to which the papermakers belonged. Standard-sized white papers or fine quality royal cost 5 Bolognese lire and 10 soldi per ream. Listed immediately following are royal blue papers, or Reali Azzurre, which sold for 4 Bolognese lire per ream. Therefore, we can see that blue paper was less expensive to produce and also to purchase. Further, 2 Milanese stationery shop inventories dating from February 1595 indicate the presence of 2 types of blue paper, the more refined carta silestra fina piccola and silestro mezza fine. To create the finest white paper, rags needed to be unused and relatively spotless, and these rags were, of course, the most expensive to purchase. The homogenization of the color was particularly important. Contrarily, in order to produce a blue shade of paper, enough blue rag fibers, traditionally wool, were added to a pulp of naturally colored linen or hemp rag fibers. Additional colorants, usually woad or indigo, could be added to intensify or homogenize the color. As we can readily see again in this different detail from the Flink drawing, we can see these different qualities and colors of fibers that comprise the sheet. The woad shrub produces blue dye, and as a plant indigenous to Europe, it was relatively inexpensive to obtain. Woad had been farmed in northern Europe since antiquity and was initially cultivated for its dye. Woad is a vat dye, meaning that it does not require a mordant or a substance to fix the dye. Indigo began to replace woad on the European market after 1500, and according to Thea Burns, visual evidence indicates that indigo dyes were rarely added to blue paper pulp until about 1600. Indigo is obtained from several different species of indigo plants that yield the dye, including Indigofera tinctoria. Indigo also does not require a mordant or substance to fix it. Though the plant originates in Asia, it was already imported to Europe during the 12th century, where Venetians were purportedly the first Europeans to employ it as a dye. The pigment came in the form of blocks of dried paste made from pulverized leaves, which the Romans thought were rocks, and associated indigo with lapis lazuli rather than originating from a plant. The belief that indigo was a rock or mineral persisted until the discovery of indigo plants in the 16th century in the Americas. An additional source of blue paper dye is logwood, which was imported to Europe beginning in the 16th century. Logwood dyed rags were processed into paper pulp, or the dye was introduced directly into the vat, a process that was credited to Dutch paper makers. The West Indies Company, founded in 1621, enabled access to logwood in the Netherlands, and Dutch paper makers eventually maintained their own mills for processing it. Litmus or tournesol derived from European lichens, and juices obtained from blueberry, violet, safflower, or cornflower also yielded blue dye. As Lorenzo Melli has discussed, evidence suggests that the earliest known use of blue paper for drawing is this one by Giovanni da Modena, which depicts a procession dating from 1410 to 1420. Da Modena worked in Bologna, the same city in which blue paper was codified in a 1389 statute. Though the proliferation of the use of blue paper as a support for drawing and printing took place in Venice in the first half of the 16th century, we lack evidence to confirm whether the use of the material for artistic purposes originated in the city. In her recent essay on the Venetian paper trade, Megan K. Williams indicates that much of Venetian paper was produced on the terraferma. As Williams notes, Venetian authorities embraced the Veneto's paper as profitable, a typically Venetian commodity that played an important role in promoting Venice's image at home and abroad. Much like in modern-day urban areas, the commerce is underpinned by its surrounding areas, and indeed the production of blue paper and its use for artistic purposes may and likely originated on the terra firma, but the material was previously associated with Venice proper rather than the Veneto more broadly. Venetian drawings on blue paper provide a counter-argument to the myth widely propagated by readings of Giorgio Vasari's Le Vite, published in 1550 with a second edition in 1568, suggesting that Venetians had mastered colore without concept of disegno, so color without concept of drawing. Drawing on blue paper demonstrates how Venetian artists viewed the relationship between disegno and colore to be a symbiotic rather than an antagonistic one. Venetian writers on art, including Marco Boschini, Lodovico Dolce, and Paolo Pino, used the term colorito or colorire in their respective writings rather than colore to describe Venetian color. Colorito does not refer to the colors themselves, but instead to the active manner in which they are applied. By employing blue paper with the combination of black and white chalks in rendering figure studies, artists explored the complementary relationship between disegno and colorito. A drawing by Titian in the Fitzwilliam Museum depicting a couple embracing demonstrates the artist's use of charcoal and white chalk on blue paper in order to articulate the figure's powerful and passionate, yet fleeting interaction. The drawing relates to the poses of his Venus and Mars, as well as his Tarquin and Lucretia. The sinuous curves of the female body in relation to space are derived through the modulation of lines of varying pressures and cross-hatching to create a sense of frenetic atmosphere. The subtle blending of white chalk on the female figure's hips counterbalances the charcoal's outlines, illustrating how the blue paper serves as a support in rendering the curvature of the female body. The tactile quality of Titian's drawing is achieved through the variegated texture of the blue paper, which allows the media to be absorbed into the paper at different degrees. This interplay contributes to the achievement of rilievo, or three-dimensionality. Similarly, Titian's preference for coarse-grained canvases which trap pigment and shadow, matter and air, serve as evidence of the painter's touch. In his De Pictura, written in 1435, humanist and pioneering art theoretician Leon Battista Alberti wrote of the importance of drawing and the ability to accurately render the effects of light and shade on all surfaces. Alberti asserted, quote, "I would like that a painted composition be well drawn and excellently colored. Therefore, in order that painters avoid blame and deserve praise, light and shadow, first of all, must be noted with great diligence. You will certainly learn in an excellent way from nature and from the objects themselves," end quote. Alberti's tenets echo throughout subsequent texts on art that were written and published internationally. And a reoccurring theme in these texts is the importance of a mastery of conveying light and shade. While advice as to how best to achieve this mastery and through which media varies, there is an agreement in the utilization of three tones: light, dark, and in between, the mezzo, or the tinte. Blue paper was a readily made, expeditious, in-between color onto which the artist could apply darker colored chalks. With black and white drawing materials on blue paper, artists could capture the complexities of their chosen subject through a range of tones, bringing the drawing one step closer to a painting, and in turn, closer to life. This is not only the case for figure studies, but also for drawings that aim to convey a sense of space and serve to inform paintings like this one. As we see in Sanradam's depiction of the South Ambulatory of St. Bavo, the artist achieves the harmonious effect produced by a unity of color, light, and shadow, which contributes to the sense of three-dimensionality in the drawing. The Dutch term to describe this illusion is houding. Willem Hoeré, the first writer to define houding in a theoretical sense in 1668, wrote that it is the perspective of light and shade by which things come forward and recede backward. In his Inlading of 1678, Rembrandt's pupil Samuel van Hoogstraten described houding as the unified organization and proper combined arrangement of color, light, and shadow. In the recent translated edition of Van Hoogstraten's text, Celeste Broussati and Jaap Jacobs define houding as a harmonious disposition of color, a chromatic harmony. Sanradam's composition is a visual manifestation of houding. The illusionistic qualities made possible by the monochromatic combination of blue paper, ink wash, and black chalk provided the foundation for the sense of three-dimensionality that would then be conveyed in one of Sanradam's numerous painted depictions of St. Bavo. Two preparatory drawings by Paolo Veronese's brother Benedetto Cagliari in the collection of the Rijksmuseum demonstrate the symbiosis between drawings on blue paper and painted color, or in this case, Venetian colorito. In his recent reassessment of late 16th and 17th century Venetian draftsmanship, Bert Meyer explains that Benedetto earned a reputation for decorative fresco projects and perhaps also carried out figure studies in the 1580s for paintings that emerged from the workshop under Paolo Veronese's name. The two studies for figural compositions in the Rijksmuseum exemplify how Benedetto melded his brother's chiaroscuro drawing technique with written annotations to inform painted colorito through the material of blue paper. On the recto of both sheets seen here is a chiaroscuro drawing conveying tonal effects through ink and wash over black chalk with white hyphing. On the verso of each sheet, traced pen and ink outlines of the composition on the recto served to block out colors which were labeled in the artist's hand. Using both sides of the sheet, Benedetto's detailed use of light and dark, as well as specific colors and their respective hues. Both drawings were purchased together by the Rijksmuseum in 1953, and Meyer described them as pendants. The drawings are from the album Borghese, and the collector has been tentatively identified as Zaccaria Sagredo. The two sheets depict the subjects of the continents of Scipio and Muscia Scaevola before Porsenna. The continents of Scipio tells of Roman general Scipio Africanus, who returned a young prisoner to her fiancé, Alucius, refusing a generous ransom in gold. As a result of this act, Alucius became an ardent supporter of Rome, and the story is an example of clemency and magnanimity which align with other tales of Roman history, such as the pendant drawing, Muscia Scaevola burning his hand before Porsenna to prove his valor. Benedetto's composition reflects the style of his brother Paolo Veronese, who from the early 1550s onwards executed these independent chiaroscuri drawings, utilizing the same confluence of material seen in Benedetto's drawings. The project for which Benedetto's drawings were executed is uncertain, though Carlo Ridolfi mentions frescoes in the Palazzo Mocenigo in Venice, including a scene of Muscia Scaevola in which the colors imitated marble, which exposed to the elements, particularly rain, turned a yellowish green. But in 1995, Meyer argued that these drawings do not correspond to the Mocenigo Commission. However, it is possible that they could refer to a similar scheme, imitating the color of marble or providing a sense of tonal relief through a rosae composition rather than one of full chromatic scale. Indeed, in 2017, Meyer revised his assessment, indicating that this hypothesis of the drawings that represent frescoes that are no longer existent in the courtyard of the Palazzo Mocenigo needs more robust evidence. He agrees that Ridolfi's mention of chiaroscuro does not preclude the use of color. As mentioned, the verso of each drawing details the colors of the composition, specifying those that should be employed. Chiara Bus's recent publication about a 1628 sample book in the Milan State Archives of Foreign Silks found in merchant shops has shed light on the term berrettino, which we see in a variation at the center there. Though color is often described, as we see in annotations like these and throughout contemporary inventories, the visual manifestation of a color can be lost to us. The sample book provides the opportunity to understand how berrettino, among other colors, would have been understood in 16th century Venice and 17th century. In turn, this visual manifestation aids us in understanding the intended tonality that Benedetto indicated. Berrettino means small cap in Italian, and Bus notes that it is a term that has been used since the 14th century to indicate gray. Indeed, Mario Aquicola, Fulvio Pellegrino Morato, and Lodovico Dolce used the term berrettine or berrettino, with Morato noting that the color is neither white nor dark, occupying a liminal space between the two, alluding to a gray color. On the verso of the Muscia Scaevola drawing, the color at center has been crossed out and rewritten to berrettine chiaro. The shorthand and cross out with notations of chiaro or light suggests that these could be preparatory drawings for a project that either no longer survives or was not realized. These compositional drawings reflect examples of Benedetto's process of disegno, both design and drawing, which shows the centrality of line, light, shade, and color in this process. In the drawings, ranges of colors from white to different qualities of reds, oranges, yellows, and blues may reflect, as Ridolfi suggests, the color of marble. Veronese himself created the interplay of textures with fictive sculptures and cameo reliefs in his fresco works, both within and the exterior of palazzi in the Veneto. In the 1630s, less than a century after Venetian artists proliferated the use of blue paper, the material began to be employed more steadily in the Dutch Republic. For some artists, this coincided with what we consider to be an Italianate stylistic shift. Govert Flinck, a former pupil of Rembrandt who was known for his ability to faithfully convey his master's style in his own drawings, began to employ blue paper as his style changed from Rembrandt's to that of what artist biographer Arnold Houbraken referred to as a clear manner of execution, characterized by the conventional ideals of form and symmetry. Interestingly, Houbraken referred to this style as Italian brushwork. Flinck and Ferdinand Bol, both former pupils of Rembrandt, aligned themselves with Jacob Bakker and Jacob van Loo, painters of the Flemish Italianate style who also employed blue paper for their figure studies, particularly of the female nude. Flink's extant drawings indicate that he began using blue paper only after he was no longer under Rembrandt's tutelage as he transitioned towards this clear style. We can see an early example of his use of blue paper still exhibiting elements of Rembrandt's manner in the drawing on the left dating from the 1630s. Visual and documentary evidence indicate that throughout the 1640s and 50s, a group of artists, including Flinck, Bakker, and van Loo, used blue paper while drawing nude female models from life in clandestine group drawing sessions. The collaborative environment in which these drawings were produced complicates the attribution history of the existing corpus of blue paper figure studies, yet the visual relationships between these drawings and extant painted compositions provide further insight into this artistic practice. As we recall, papermaking began in the Netherlands in 1586. According to paper historian Henk Voorn, before 1674, the paper that was produced in the Zaan region of the Netherlands was either blue or gray. White paper was not produced in the Netherlands until that year. Voorn suggested that 1635 was the year that the production of the famous Zaanland blue paper for sugar wrapping began. However, Mills and Egmond were most likely the first to produce blue paper in Holland, and there was already mention of a dye vat there in 1620. Blue paper predates white paper in the Netherlands, and the colored paper for packing, whether it was brown, gray, or blue, formed a substantial part of production and commerce in Amsterdam during this period. I uncovered a notarial deed preserved in the Stadsarchive in Amsterdam dated to November 1635, which indicates that blue paper, tied with the production of paper for sugar wrapping, was already an active commodity in Amsterdam by 1635. Sugar refineries were established in Amsterdam around 1600, and they were supplied with sugar from the Dutch colonies. Cones of sugar, luxury products associated with colonization and trade, were wrapped in blue paper and tied with a string, as depicted in Northern European still life and genre paintings dating from the 17th and 18th centuries. A shortage of salt and sugar after the 80 Years' War sparked the first Dutch activities of trading in the Atlantic region. The Netherlands relied on enslaved labor in the colonies for sugar, which was sent to Dutch cities like Amsterdam for refining. Sugar refineries, depicted in the engraving at top center, were established in Amsterdam around 1620, overtaking Antwerp as the European center of sugar refining. In these refineries, sugar loaves, once dry, were packed in blue paper to keep off flies and tied with a string and dispatched for domestic and international sale. Blue paper thus holds a critical place in early modern Dutch material culture. At the intersection of the utilitarian and the artistic, that of a wrapping paper for a product of enslaved labor, and that of a drawing material used to explore the tonality of both dark and light skin as it translates to paintings. In the utilitarian and artistic realm, the material is an intermediary step, a wrapping for both transport and sale, and a preparatory layer, so to speak. Blue paper is therefore both the skin itself as well as its middle tone, a material critical to skin's rendering. This drawing, attributed to Jacob Bakker in Dresden, of a seated woman half nude, is part of a corpus of figure studies on blue paper by this group of artists, and is the only extant drawing from the group to depict a black female model. There are other drawings of Black individuals on blue paper, but they are primarily 18th century examples. In this composition, published for the first time in 2020 on the occasion of the Rembrandt House exhibition Black in Rembrandt's Time, Bacher carefully rendered flesh tones with the modulation of black and white chalk on blue paper. The model sits distantly gazing to her left, with her lips slightly parted. Captured in a moment of action, she points towards the distance with her right arm. She's nude from the waist up, and she lifts the tattered edge of her skirt to reveal her 2 feet, one stockinged and the other bare. As is common with these figure studies on blue paper, the setting is intimated, only schematically rendered. However, the shading of the figure's upper body is meticulous. The outer portion of her right arm is carefully modeled with blended black and white chalk on blue paper, resulting in a glistening pattern of illumination on her décolleté. The blending of shadow where the light meets the point of contour provides a sense of plasticity. The careful blending of chalk shows a particular attention to nature and to understanding the tonality of flesh, the lessons from which were then translated into these artists' compositions for portraits and history paintings. No extant painting by Bacher nor his Amsterdam contemporaries is associated with this particular study. However, a Black nude woman, as part of Ferdinand Boll's Pharaoh's Daughter discovers Moses in the rush basket, seen here in this detail from 1660 to 1663 in the background there. As Margriet van Eyckma Holmes explains, a Black female figure is included in other contemporaneous Dutch depictions of the subject, referring to the story setting on the African continent. Although that we cannot presently name the woman in Bacher's drawing, recent publications by Mark Ponte and others have shed light on a small community of free Black individuals who lived near modern-day Jodenbriestraat in Amsterdam between the 1630s and 1650s, and this is when Rembrandt lived in the same neighborhood and where Govert Flinck also worked. Drawing together from live models, these artists would have naturally referenced elements of each other's compositions. However, it is also probable that drawings by different hands depicting the same model in the same pose were made, as we see in these 2 drawings by Flinck and Bacher. Indeed, the Courtauld drawing given to Flinck was most likely produced in one of these group drawing sessions. Jacob van Lo's painting depicting Diana and Callisto provides further evidence. The painting was derived from elements of Titian's invented painting of the subject, which was widely disseminated through Cornelis Cort's prints. Depicting the same moment as Titian's famed composition, Van Loo combined the exposure of Callisto's pregnancy by her companions and her subsequent condemnation by Diana. However, in his painting, Van Loo did not evoke the Venetian artist's sense of atmosphere, nor the tonality of his colorito. Instead, his figures ascribe to the clear, bright mode of his nude paintings on an intimate scale. The clearly defined figures are the source of contemplation, rather than the emotion of the moment he depicts. In Van Loo's painting, the nude figure at the composition's point of focus, Diana, and the nymph seen from behind directly in front of her, both resonate with Flinck's blue paper studies. The drawing attributed to Flinck depicting a seated female nude as Diana is executed in a more refined manner than is typically seen in the artist's blue paper studies. And scholars have noted that because of this, the drawing cannot be given to Flinck without question. However, upon close inspection, the modeling of the figure was small, yet clearly defined hatch marks of black, particularly in the areas that define the legs, and the smoothly applied white chalk is consistent with Flinck. The same can be said of the Courtauld study given to Flinck, of which the figure's pose is rather similar to the nymph behind Diana. Diana is seated in her characteristic pose, also identifiable by the moon diadem she wears. The position of her head and left hand differ from the painting as she glances to her right with her head towards the viewer and rests her left hand on the fabric beneath her. In Van Lo's painting, the goddess looks directly at Callisto and holds a staff in her left hand. These differences suggest that Van Loo likely executed his own drawing of a model from life who assumed Diana's pose. The other drawing by Flinck depicting a figure that can be recognized within Van Loo's painting of Diana and Callisto is that of a reclining female nude seen from behind in the Rijksmuseum. The blue sheet has been damaged, possibly by water, and relined with another blue sheet visible along the edges. And this damage accounts for the difference in the support's tone. Therefore, it's difficult to determine the characteristic of the original sheet of blue paper. Despite the damage, Flink's signature and date of 1643 have been preserved. Evincing Flink's new mode of handling, the drawing demonstrates how he used the materials of black and white chalk on blue paper to alter his style of draftsmanship in the early 1640s. Still bearing the bold strokes of chalk that surround the figure, but showing the subtle definition of the body itself through more smoothly applied black and white chalk, the reclining female figure seen from behind is a visual manifestation of Flink's stylistic transition. In Banlow's paintings, differences in the positioning of the head and left hand, as well as the feet, indicate that the pose was likely taken from a clandestine drawing session. Notably, in his painting of the subject from 1649, Jakob Bakker situated the goddess with her back to the viewer in a position that's markedly similar to Flink's reclining female nude. The luminescent flesh produced the artist's smooth modeling of blue paper is then translated into a polychromatic painted composition. In 17th-century Amsterdam, the use of blue paper for drawings that exhibit the Flemish Italianate style prompted artists to explore the plasticity of form, generating figures through subtle gradations of tones. The impact of 16th-century Venice and its association with blue paper was evident 300 years later, when on his way to Venice, Turner journeyed through Austria on at least 3 of his continental tours, stopping in Bregenz in the summer of 1840. Peter Bauer determined that Turner's wove blue paper sheet seen here was made on the continent rather than in England, making it an unusual choice. As described by Joanna Selborn in the 2008 Courtauld exhibition catalog Paths to Fame, quote, throughout the 1830s, memories of Venetian light and air stirred Turner's imagination. His style loosened and his coloring became more intense as he continually sought to render the effects of atmosphere, his technical virtuosity reaching a climax with his luminous studies in light. This sketch, in a transitional style, is executed with great vitality and economy of line. Most notable in the foreground figure who is loosely handled to the point of abstraction, end quote. This ephemeral quality is heightened by the choice of blue paper, which was perfect for capturing what a local resident described as the misty blue appearance of the distant Alps. Here, similar to Titian and Benedetto Cagliari's atmospheric colorito, Turner used blue paper to capture the ephemerality of a moment in time. The 19th and 20th century drawings in the Courtauld exhibition, like this one, are on wove rather than laid or handmade blue paper. When the paper machine was invented by Nicolas Louis Robert and introduced in the 18th century, at the end of the 18th century, the manufacture of blue paper on a wove wire base rather than handmade laid paper of the early modern period that we have focused on today became the predominant international standard. British artist Wyndham Lewis began using blue paper in 1941 while in Canada. Lewis encountered the inexpensive wove blue paper at a drugstore, so he too was prompted to use the material during a time of economic privation due to its availability and cost-effectiveness. In The Bone Beneath the Pulp, the 2004 exhibition catalog of the Courtauld drawings by Lewis, Jackie Klein notes how the artist's drawings, like bathing women seen here from the late 1930s and 40s, make the most of dynamic and unusual color combinations, which in their complexity and completeness might effectively function as painting. The somewhat unlikely comparison of 2 drawings from the exhibition, Federico Barocci's preparatory drawing of the doctor from the Louvre circumcision on laid blue paper, and Lewis's drawing of women seen from behind on wove blue paper, both composed with colored chalks, demonstrate how inherently blue paper has withstood the test of time in depicting human figures. Barocci's drawings exhibit the influence of his first and only master. Venetian artist Battista Franco, who also used blue paper, as well as the Bassano family of the Veneto, who arguably pioneered the use of colored chalks with blue paper. As Luca Baroni notes, whereas Jacopo Bassano used pastelli to evoke colored areas, Barocci's handling of pastel is ultimately connected to the definition and progressive building up of the human figure. These drawings are evocative of the enduring efficacy and efficiency of blue paper in terms of economy and artistic process. Blue paper, whether used to emphasize temporality or to generate a subtle gradation of tones and in conveying three-dimensionality, brings life to a figure, or more broadly, to a drawn composition. A liminal material, an intermediary step with respect to its coloristic properties, its role in artistic practice, and in the consumption of a commodity, the multifaceted material of blue paper thus holds a critical place in the practice and discourse of executing works on paper. Thank you.